Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look back at week 15 of the 2022 season of the Overwatch League. The first weekend of the Summer Showdown qualifiers, the first weekend of the second half of the season. We are through it. We are past it. Let's talk about what happened. Real quick, let's throw up my picks from this past week. You can see how I did. 2-0 in big picks. We are going to get that big pick score positive or at least even. I can feel it in my bones. Overall record 8-5. Really interesting week. A lot of interesting results happening. Things that were unexpected. So let's jump in and let's talk about what we had. An interesting thing happened the first 4 matches of the Overwatch League this season, or this weekend, I should say. A lot of people predicted them wrong. I got one game right in the first 4, and that was the first match, which was the Florida Mayhem versus the London Spitfire. I thought the Florida Mayhem looked pretty good against the Spitfire. I thought the Spitfire did not look as good as I expected them to. A little bit surprising when you consider the fact that the Spitfire are pretty good at rush compositions, and this composition, while not exactly a rush composition, borrows a lot of the same ideas and principles from your rush composition, so it was quite surprising, or at least a little surprising, to see the Spitfire struggle as much as they did in that first match of the weekend. Thursday was a weird day, though. It was the first day of the new meta. I think a lot of things were kind of not as necessarily expected. Over time, I think things started to solidify a little bit more. But this was definitely an interesting match. Good for the Mayhem. I think it's good to see the Mayhem getting wins against some pretty good teams, pretty solid teams, something they've not really been able to do for a bit. Obviously, they beat the Spitfire in the tournament, which was a good win for them. But this is a good win now, back into getting to winning in the regular season against some decent opponents. Which, like I said, they were struggling to do up until recently. Good win for them. Second match on Thursday was the New York Excelsior with a reverse sweep victory over the Houston Outlaws. Definitely interesting. I was impressed by what I saw from New York. I think that the addition of Onsoon J definitely helped this team a lot more than expected. I think it definitely helped boost this team up quite a bit. I thought Kellen played very well in the second half of this series, and I think that was kind of the difference maker in why they turned it around and won. Got their first victory on a push map and their first victory on a control map in map 5, so definitely an interesting result from them. I thought that the Dorado defense and offense that they had to end the series was very, very impressive. A lot of people considered it a throw, and I think there is maybe some merit to that, no pun intended, that it was a throw, but I also think that New York and Kellen really stepped it up in the second half on Dorado and the second half of the series, and that was the difference maker. I think right now New York's success is going to be live or die on Kellen. If Kellen can get value, I think the team looks pretty good. If they don't, I think it is where the team will struggle the most. This is a team right now that I think would be a very interesting team to watch going forward. There was the news about Piggy getting released that came out yesterday. New York only has their one tank on the roster with Kellen. They'd be an interesting team to see if they kind of eyeball Piggy and maybe add him to their roster just to kind of bolster their roster and what they had. So they're an interesting team to follow for that reason. Could potentially, if they can keep things going with Onsoon J and the way this roster is kind of looking right now, they could potentially have that kind of bounce back performance in the second half of the season. I don't really expect it. It's a little tough to say that right now, but we'll see what happens. I think it'll be interesting. I'll talk about the Outlaws more later with their second series of the weekend, but all in all, the Outlaws have an interesting look to them as well that I'll talk more about. Fuel with a win over the Gladiators, stopping the Gladiators' attempt at a reverse sweep. Tough weekend for the Gladiators. They went 0-2 this weekend. We'll talk more about them, of course, later as well with the Outlaws series. But I did want to highlight some things about the Gladiators that were a trend in this series that they continued going forward with in the series against the Outlaws. They started both of these series with Shu playing Sojourn. I think it's a terrible decision. I know they want Shu in the match because Shu's an important part of the roster. But to think that Shu, to me, you don't put Shu on an off roll, especially not against teams like Dallas and Houston, who are actually like really good teams. You don't off roll Shu. That's just a weird decision to make, in my opinion. I don't think Reiner looks particularly good on the Junker Queen, and I think that Funny Astro and Skewed are not giving the support in some situations. I think they're not terrible, but I definitely think against some of these better teams, which they played this weekend, you're seeing some of those flaws where they don't look as solid in terms of supporting the rest of the team, supporting Reiner in particular. I thought that was a pretty lackluster performance from that part of the team. I think that Kevster and Ans had some great performances. I didn't like Shu and Sojourn, like I said, but it is what it is. Fuel looked very good, I think, this weekend. Obviously, winning against the Gladiators, good win for them. Able to stop the reverse sweep from happening. You'd prefer not to see the series that close if you're a Fuel fan, but obviously, you win when you can, and a win is a win, so you're not going to complain about that. But definitely an interesting look from the Fuel. This series was all Doha. They didn't put Sparkle in at all on the Genji, which was a bit of a surprise. But I think that they played very, very well, even with Doha in on the role. We did see Sparkle in their later series, but in this first one, it was all Doha, and he looked pretty good. So it was a good win for the Fuel. Hanbin looks very good on the Junker Queen. I think he really is the key to success for this team. If they can put Hanbin in the game, I think they look a lot better. They looked really good in the kickoff clash because they could play Hanbin. They look really good now because they can play Hanbin. And I think that's going to be the thing to watch with the Fuel going forward, is how they perform with Hanbin in the lineup. Moving on to Friday, probably the biggest surprise of the weekend, the most surprising result. I don't even think that New York beating Houston was that surprising, considering the last time they played, it was pretty close. This series not only wasn't close, but it was the Boston Uprising with a massive win over the Atlanta Reign. This series was not close at all. It was a 3-1 win for Boston. Yes, Atlanta took a map, but it was a pretty one-sided affair, all things considered. It was a very good look for Boston in this series in particular. Atlanta's a team I always think is slow to adjust and slow to adapt in these earlier tournaments. I think it'll be interesting to see where Atlanta lies in the later part of this tournament cycle when Speedily is of age. Genji is massive in this meta, and Speedily is, no offense to Nero, Speedily is a much better player in that role. He is one of the best American flex DPS players and arguably best flex DPS players in the league, period. And so it'll be interesting if this kind of team comes out after this. We saw some stuff from Nero where he said that he was struggling somewhat heavily in terms of how to play the Genji in this meta. It just doesn't. It's a very different Genji playstyle. That's also probably some of the reason why we saw Doha in the first series for the Fuel as opposed to Sparkle. So I'll be interested in kind of seeing where this Reign team goes when Speedily is able to play. But I thought that the Reign just did not look as comfortable in this meta as you would like. But that's a trend with the Reign. If they can kind of clean it up enough to make the tournament, I'll be interested to see kind of where they are when the tournament hits. For Boston, I think Boston's looked okay. I mean, this match, they looked pretty good. They didn't look that good in their second match, so they're tough to really kind of predict. They're tough to call, but all in all, it was a decent showing from the Uprising in this game. I guess a pretty good showing. They won pretty big. But, I'm not sold on the Uprising, necessarily. But they did have a good result, which is something you definitely have to kind of give them credit for. Second match on Friday was the San Francisco Shock reverse sweeping the Washington Justice. And I really want to make a comment on the Justice. So before I do that, let's talk about the Shock. The Shock have done this now several times this season. Obviously, they reverse swept the Gladiators. They reverse swept the Justice once before already this season. The Shock looked pretty good in this meta, which is a little surprising. This meta is not one that's necessarily built for their roster's strengths, particularly in the support role. Obviously, they are running double flex support in terms of their roster with Violet and with Finn. And this meta is Lucio and Brigitte. So this meta is not great for the Shock. This is a match that really the Justice probably should have won because it does fit their style better. But the Shock were victorious. They won in the reverse sweep, and it really was massive performances from Proper. I think Kaluge looked very good on the Junker Queen, especially in the second half of the series. And I thought it was pretty good performances as well coming out of Kilo. I don't think we saw Sam in the series at all. I believe it was just Proper and Kilo because it's a lot of Genji and Sojourn and Genji and Ashe. And I thought the Shock looked pretty solid in the series. So that's why they won. Justice, oh boy. I don't even know where to begin with the Justice team, really. This is the third time ever, historically, but the second time this season that the Justice were reverse swept by the San Francisco Shock. I think that's probably the most reverse sweeps by one team against another team. I can't imagine any other instances of a team getting reverse swept by the same team 3 times. Now, one of them was in 2020. The team was very different in 2020, of course. I think Supreme was still the head coach, though, when it happened, because it was in the 2020 playoffs, or the play-ins, I should say. But happened earlier this season, happened again this week. And there's a lot of rumors about the Washington Justice and them making massive changes to their roster, them looking to trade a bunch of players, shopping their players around, all this stuff, all this news, blah, 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 going on with the Justice. And I don't know the truth and validity behind that statement. There's been a lot of rumors about a specific contenders team as well, Team Peps, I believe, getting picked up by a team in the Overwatch League. I don't know if that's Paris. I don't know if that's Washington. It's unclear what's going on here necessarily. Some of the teams it's a little unclear. I think but if this is the end of this Justice roster that we've seen get built, who knows, right? Like I said, this is just a little bit of a rant potentially, right? And we'll talk more about them a little bit later. They did win a match this weekend that they should have won, and they did win, so good on them for that. But my kind of thing with this Justice team is this team should have been so much better than what we've seen in every way possible. And I cannot help but feel that this is a full coaching whiff by this team. I don't necessarily love the decisions that were made by this team. I thought that they took Decay out at times when he shouldn't have been out, and they put Assassin in at times when he shouldn't have been in. And this is a meta where I don't really understand why they have Decay in on the Genji. He's not known for his Genji play. It's not something he's necessarily spectacular at. And I think that map 5 in this series was lost because Decay just was not, his Genji was not as good as, the Genji of proper. Decay went in too deep because I think he didn't really necessarily know the timings well. I don't think the team has shown the coordination you need. But at the end of the day, there's been a lot of decisions made by this team, organizationally and coaching-wise, that just don't make much sense. And I have to imagine that this is a team that we might not see after this week. This may be the last weekend we ever see this iteration of the Washington Justice play. With Mag, Decay, Happy, Assassin, Krillin, Vigilante, Kalios, and Opener, right? This roster may be disbanded after this week. Who knows? There's a lot of rumors and stories and whatnot. It's a lot that's going on right now. I cannot help but feel that many of these players, potentially all of these players, will never get a shot in the Overwatch League again, and I think a lot of that blame is going to fall on the organization, on Pri as the general manager, as Supreme as the head coach, for not giving the players the resources to succeed, not putting these players in positions to succeed, and making decisions that hurt the team. I am just so disappointed by this team. You cannot tell me that a team twice in the same season and 3 times with the same coaching staff can go up 2-0 against a very good team 3 times in their history and lose every single time. They have never beaten the Shock, despite 3 times going up by 2 maps. It's embarrassing, and it's a terrible thing to see, and I think 100% you have to put blame on this roster, on the coaching staff. There is no excuse for that. You cannot keep allowing the players to be put in this position and then make the wrong decisions time and time again. I don't really know why they opted to do what they did with this team. Maybe Assassin's Genji isn't very good. I don't know fully. I don't think he's necessarily known for his Genji in the same way that a player like Sparkle is. But Assassin is a Genji player. That is one of his predominant heroes. Why is Assassin not in? I understand that you want Decay playing, but Decay is not meant for this meta. He's not built for this meta. Yet they are forcing him when they maybe shouldn't be, and they're benching him when they shouldn't be. Which to me screams poor coaching, and I don't like what this team has done. I don't like what this organization has done, and it feels bad that this may be the end of this Justice roster, and we have seen so little from them because of failings of the organization. Yeah, that's where we're going to end that rant. I think it's just a shame to see this Justice roster become what it has, despite the amount of talent that I think they've had historically, or at least over the past 2 years. Seeing this team fail time and time again is just really disheartening to see. let's move on to the big pick game that I had on Friday, which was the Toronto Defiant versus the Vancouver Titans, the Battle for Canada. This series was a very good one. It was a banger. It was a 5-map series. This was probably the best match of the weekend. It was up there. Outlaws Gladiators was also up there. Fuel Gladiators was a pretty good series. NYXL Houston was a pretty good series too. But Defiant vs. Titans was an incredible series. I think you should watch it if you haven't seen it. The Toronto Defiant in this meta, I think, are a very legitimate contender. And I mentioned it on Friday, or what was it, Wednesday? This was Wednesday. That I think Hotba is built for this meta in a lot of ways because he's a player who's thrived on DPS in the past. He's also thrived on Roadhog in the past. I think those skill sets will help Hotba be better in this meta. And I think that his Junker Queen looked pretty good. I think that we've seen decent performances, of course, out of Twilight and Chodong, which is a good thing to see. And I think that Hisu is going to do pretty well in this meta. And I think that Aldo had a pretty good Genji performance. And so I think the Defiant are going to be a pretty good team in this meta. I thought they looked pretty good in this series. But the Vancouver Titans, oh boy. The Vancouver Titans, this meta, I think are legit. I know this sounds ridiculous for a team that going into this tournament cycle lost 12 games. I know. It sounds utterly ridiculous. But I think the Vancouver Titans going into this meta look legit. Aspire on the Ashe and the Sojourn, very good. Sojourn in particular, which he played a lot of, is really, really good. I think Mirror's Junker Queen is pretty decent. Not the best in the league, but good. I think that the addition of King on that Genji, I think I see why they made the change to go to King. Because if you're not going to have Mirror in the DPS, you're going to have him in the tank role, you need a DPS who can play the Genji, who can play those flex DPS heroes. That is what you get with King. I was very impressed by the performance that he had this weekend on a team that, we've been pretty low on. I thought they looked pretty good. And I think Masa and Aztac had a very good performance this weekend as well. So I think the Titans are legit now. I think they really do have a potential to be a better team than some of these other lower level teams. Who knows what the Justice are going to be going forward? The NYXL beat the Outlaws, but I don't feel 100% confident in them. The Eternal, they beat them. The Uprising, they're not incredible either. The Titans are not so far behind that it is an unrecoverable thing. If they have a good enough tournament cycle, we could see the Titans in a legit spot to contend for the play-in tournament at the end of the season. They could make this tournament, 100%. They could make it. It is not out of the picture for this Titans roster to make the Summer Showdown. Their schedule is not that difficult. And differential-wise, they're looking pretty good right now. So don't sleep on the Titans. They are looking pretty good. Second big pick was on Saturday, Spitfire against the Uprising. Not a close series. Spitfire dominant in this one with a 3-0 win over Boston. I think London just did not look very good against the Mayhem. It's tough to kind of read the first weekend, but considering the Uprising had a very good result against the Reign, and then the next day were just kind of destroyed by the Spitfire cleaned it up, figured out what they were doing that worked, figured out what they were doing that didn't work, and they really cleaned their play up going into the series against Boston. I don't think Boston necessarily made many changes because they did well the day before. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes a loss early on helps you recognize your shortcomings, and sometimes a win early on hides your shortcomings in a way that you don't necessarily see them, and sometimes you need to kind of have those moments where you struggle to recognize where you're not doing as well as you thought you were. I think that's what happened with London. They had a very good performance beating up Boston in this one, and it was a pretty solid showing from them. Justice beat the Eternal. I already gave my piece with the Justice. The Eternal do not look very good. They also could be a team that's blowing up their roster. Who knows at this point in time. Justice with a big win in this series. It was not particularly close. It was a 3-0 for the Justice. They won convincingly. They won handily. And, the Justice, I think, have talent. We'll see what happens. The Eternal, I just think, do not look very comfortable. I think that they've made too many blow-ups to their roster this season. They've completely changed their DPS line. This is no dig at Dove and Wub. I don't think they're particularly special. And in terms of their flashiness, I think they've struggled to kind of compete with all these other players around them. And this was a series where just Decay and Happy were basically let to do whatever they want. And so just a struggle for the Eternal on this one. The final match on Saturday was the Houston Outlaws with a win over the LA Gladiators, stopping the Gladiators' attempt at a reverse sweep. Another great series this weekend. Another one that I would put among the best series of the weekend. Like I said before, it was really good. Definitely an interesting one to watch. Gladiators, the same issues in this series, I think. They did it again with Shu. Once again, I don't necessarily think that Reiner looks great in the Junker Queen. That was true in this series as well. Houston, obviously, with the changes to their roster, bringing in Lep and bringing in Doge. They ran Dante the entirety of the series against the Gladiators, and they ran Dante just on the 5th map against New York. They ran Doge primarily in the series against New York. I think their goal is to have Dante play Junker Queen more than Doge, but I think because it was New York, they kind of thought they could just throw Doge in there and they'd be fine, and it didn't end up happening, and so then they kind of had to change to Dante going to map 5. Didn't really work the way they wanted to, but I thought they looked a lot better in this series. Gladiators came very close to winning it again. I think they made some good plays down the stretch, but Houston was just a little bit better, and they took the series. So interesting one to see kind of what happens with both these teams going forward, but the Gladiators definitely struggled a lot this weekend, and definitely a team that you have to look pretty... you have to scrutinize a little bit, because they did not look very good. A lot of drama surrounding this team right now because of some of the stuff that happened with them, but interesting series to say the least. Vancouver Titans, Sunday, August 14th. They did it. They got the win over the Paris Eternal, and one of the reasons why I mentioned saying that the Vancouver Titans look legit is because not only did they win this series, it wasn't even close. They obliterated the Paris Eternal. This series was a roll. The Titans dominated. It was a absolute domination by the Titans on the Eternal. And that's why I think the Titans are legit. They are... Not only should they have beaten the Eternal, they proved that they are significantly better than the Eternal, and they're competing with the Defiant. Keep your eye on the Titans. They have a big game next weekend against New York. Might even be a big pick level game. We'll see. But really interested in seeing what happens to the Titans team going forward. I think they looked really, really good this weekend. Shock beat the Mayhem 3-0. Shock continue to win. Mayhem, I just simply don't think are good enough to beat the Shock. They can beat good teams, obviously, and they can look decent, but they're not going to beat the Shock. Like, I'm sorry. Even though I don't love the Shock as much as I think, overall, I think their peaks have not been as good as a team of the Gladiators. I still think the Shock are way better than the Mayhem, and they're going to keep beating teams like the Mayhem in that kind of skill level for the rest of the season. I don't think the Shock's first loss is going to come to a team like the Mayhem or the Justice, even though it almost did. Or the Spitfire is going to come to a team like Houston or Dallas or the Gladiators. The Fuel beat the Excelsior 3-1. Was not a terrible showing from New York on the first map. But down the stretch, I thought Kellen did not stand up the way he did in the previous series against the Outlaws. And so I think that the Fuel looked a lot better. They played Sparkle. Another difference maker, I think, is that Sparkle's Genji was better than Yaki's Genji. I think Yaki outperformed Doha on Genji on the first map. But on the later maps, it was all Sparkle. He just looked way better, way more in control. And I think Hanbin definitely got his stuff together as the series progresses well. I think he's been a pretty solid Junker Queen. Might be the top we have right now in the league. Good win for them. Final match of the weekend was the Toronto Defiant with a pretty big win, 3-1 over the Atlanta Reign. I was quite impressed by what we saw from the Defiant this weekend. Like I said, I think with Hotba in a position to play a hero that I think he should be very, very good at, I think that what we see with the Defiant is that they have the potential to be pretty good. The tournament for this month is in Toronto, so I think it would be pretty embarrassing if they don't make the tournament. I think the team knows that. I think they are going to put in their all because they want to play in front of their home fans. Toronto has never had an Overwatch League event before, so definitely want to see what happens. But I thought the Defiant played very well this weekend, and I think you can't really underestimate what they did. Reign had a rough weekend. I think that the Reign are going to be a team to watch, see how they bounce back from this. Reign and Gladiators, two teams that were very, very good last tournament, and so far the season is struggling quite a bit. Reign really suffering in the standings, dropping, I think they were in 5th, and they've dropped down to 7th. So it was a rough weekend for them. Overall, the teams around them did well. They did not. So tough outing for them. Real quick, I'm just going to throw up the overall standings. You can take a look at them here. You can see kind of where things have moved, where changes are, all that type of stuff. What an interesting tournament we've got so far. It'll be interesting to see kind of where it goes from here and to see kind of what happens as the season kind of progresses. But that is all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. Let me know your thoughts on what I said down below. If you agree, disagree, whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you. That's going to be all from me for today. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye.